All right, welcome to the Killer Psychologist. Today we're going to talk about psychopathy. And one of the most intriguing statistics about psychopathy is the disproportionate impact a small percentage of individuals with psychopathic traits can have on society, particularly in the criminal justice context. So, studies suggest that there's a significant proportion of serious crimes, including violent and white collar crimes, that are committed by individuals with psychopathic traits. They say that it's about 1% of the general population includes individuals that are high in psychopathy. However, in the prison system or in the prison population, there's an estimate that's suggesting that it's a higher percentage, potentially up to 25%. And we could discuss this and more. I have two experts today who are forensic psychologists and have worked in the prison system. And one of the things that prompted me to have this discussion is that I found a lot of misinformation on social media about psychopathy. And I just wanted to set the record straight and talk about it. And so that's why we're having this discussion today about psychopathy. And so I'm really excited to have Dr. Ali here today, especially. He works in a prison in Pakistan. And I want to know your experience and what that's like working in the justice system in Pakistan, what it looks like for you from day to day. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anderson, for having me. It's been a great pleasure. So first of all, my experience, I think Pakistan is a developing country, and just like any other developing country, our prisons are evolving. The criminal justice system, so the rehabilitation part of the corrections is evolving every day. So we learn every day new things, we practice new things, and we try out a lot of new things every day. So when I started, it was brand new. I was a pioneer psychologist in a corrections. The prison where I started working, it was established in 1904. But the first time they ever had a psychologist was myself about 5 years ago. So it's like very late when we started, but better late than never. But so we started off screening of individuals, inmates with mental health issues, doing the profiling for them, and then doing risk assessments. For courts, writing reports for courts, and one of the things that we come across very often is this using this psychopathy checklist, because we see this a lot often than usual. You mentioned like about 25% of prison inmates that they have this psychopathic traits. I bet I found more, like about 50% or more. So they have this. So because a lot of people who end up in the criminal justice system, they have some sort of a personality with psychopathy. They have these traits, and so I think that's why I find this topic very intriguing, and I think this is a conversation that we should definitely have, because there are again a lot of myths about it, and a lot of people have misconceptions about what psychopathy is. Is it always good? Is it always bad? And all of those things, I think we'll talk more about it today and just clarify those things.
What do you think the biggest misconception is about psychopathy from your experience working in the prison?
So I think the fact that it's not always bad to be a psychopath, right? There are examples of successful psychopaths in the world, and a lot of people, and at some point, we can say that everyone has some kind of psychopathic trait in them. We don't obviously classify them as psychopaths or criminal psychopaths. Not everyone is a criminal psychopath, right? That's just a very small percentage of people who end up becoming a criminal psychopath, and they are very rare breed, very hard to identify, very hard to find, and very hard to catch by the criminal justice system. So all of those things are there. So and the majority of the psychopathic population that's actually in the society, they're free, and they are not psychopathic disorders. I think they just have psychopathic traits, and traits are like part of personality, and anyone could have those traits.
So you're saying that percentage that they've captured is larger, certainly in the criminal justice system, but are you thinking in the general population as well? It's actually higher.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think we don't assess everyone around us, right? Very few of us get a psychopathic checklist score, right? Rated. So that's why we don't have the exact number, but I'm pretty sure it's a lot more than we assume and the stats tell us. Just the case with the prisons, because it's a lot higher here, especially if I talk about the context of Pakistan. What we experience in our clinical practice every day, we come across psychopathy very often. So a lot of people like end up manipulating the criminal justice system. People coming in, murder cases, and they're trying to manipulate the criminal justice system and faking their symptoms, having this grandiose sense of self-worth, having a record of juvenile delinquency, early behavioral problems. So all of those things, and sexual issues. So we get a complete picture of psychopathy in individuals, and it takes us a while to obviously assess, and we have to uh, uh, observe those individuals in different settings, and have our observations, because I mean, if someone is we are about to tag someone, then it cannot be just an interview. It has to be a more broader observation, and review of the record and collateral and everything else. So I think based on that, it's my uh, conclusion that it's like a lot more than what it seems like from the statistics, and this should be studied further. And I'm doing this in my PhD, studying psychopathy, especially cross-culturally examining them between Pakistan and US population.
That is very fascinating, and I agree with Dr. Ali, in your analysis of this underestimate of true psychopathy in the correctional population. One of the reasons why I think that is the case is that when you look at the research literature, a majority of the studies are done in a homogeneous population, and that is in Canada. So we don't have a lot of data cross culturally. I mean, we have some Western data, but a lot of it is related to studies that are done in Canada. One of the reasons why it's so hard to get data in the United States on this is that in the prison systems, for example, in California, where I worked in the correctional system, access to doing research with inmates that are incarcerated is very difficult to do. There's a lot of restrictions, and that's the one barrier. And I'm interested to hear more about your research in terms of how you're going to access this population to be able to study them.
So my idea is like I want to focus, because I already work in a prison system in Pakistan for more than 5 years now. So I already have access to this population, and I'll just be like moving to the US to do the PhD, and just to do the research part of it. So I'll continue to have access to this data that I already have, and I'll now just need to figure out a way to get into the US correction system to interview some individuals there.
Wow, I'm so excited about your research. I originally wanted to get archival data from the prisons to examine these individuals, and that was quite a lot of barriers for me to retrieve that data. At some point, I was offered to fly to a correctional facility and go through all the data myself. And uh, I declined on that one because, being a student in school and have to pay for all of this research, I think I just wanted to graduate at some point. But I will stand behind you and help you with your research. And I'm very curious, and I am so glad that I appreciate the people that are doing the research, because I think we need to update some statistics here and some information. And I actually didn't know what Dr. Wetterer said about some of the data coming from Canada, or why it's not quite accurate.
Yeah. So, and this is historical, and part of the reason is, at least my understanding of it, is when you look at, so let's look at who developed the PCL, right? The psychopathy checklist, which, the audience might want to know that, we do have a formal way of assessing for psychopathy that, has an empirically, meaning it's been researched. It's a research-based instrument, and it was developed by Bob Hare up in at the University of British Columbia. So he developed the scales and validated the scale primarily in a Canadian, prison population. And so Canada, it's becoming more heterogeneous in terms of the diversity of the population. But back when this scale was developed, Canada was more of a homogeneous population, meaning there's not a lot of diversity. So that's one of the initial limitations, I think, that that had been discussed in the literature. There's been studies that have been done since that using the PCLR, but like like you said, getting access to that population to do that level of research can be it can be challenging. It's not that it's impossible. For example, I worked in the forensic system in Nevada, not in the prison itself, but in the forensic state hospital system there. And one of the things I discovered is that there, at least in some states, there's a little more openness to allow students to come in and do research, to have access to correctional populations to do research. I know this because one of my colleagues at my doctoral program actually did a study inside a prison at the Northern Nevada Correctional Center. So I know it's possible. It's just you have to know the right people, and you have to say the right things in your IRBs and everything to get access. Because when you're doing research with inmates, it's like with children, right? Because of their custody status, there's a number of things that you have to go through to be able to access them to do research.
Well, I'm excited because Dr. Ali has plans to come to the United States.
And I'd be happy to collaborate with you in this as well, because in my other roles, I teach in a doctoral program in clinical psychology, and I have students who are very interested in forensic psychology. They're interested in doing this type of research. But again, one of the things I tell them, I've got a couple of dissertations that I've heard that are forensically focused right now, is that one of the limitations is going to be, our ability to access these folks, in these settings. So it can be done. It's just, like I said, it's tricky.
Absolutely, and I think I'm slightly aware of the challenges and looking forward to finding ways to overcome them and get access to this data. So yeah, in any case, we need to know the numbers here in Pakistan. I also think that the cutoff score for PCL, that is too high for culture, and it's not culturally adapted. So we also need to figure out a way to culturally adapt it here for local use. So all of those things are applications of the research that I want to do.
So, Dr. Ali, I would love for you to describe a little bit more for the listeners where Pakistan is located in relation to other countries, and what percentage of terrorists do you interface with for you working in a prison in Pakistan?
Yeah, so Pakistan, it's a small country located in South Asia. We are neighbors to Iran, Afghanistan, China. So they are our neighboring countries, and India. So they're all our neighbors. We share borders with them. And because of our territorial location, we have a history of coming across a lot of terrorist populations, especially because of the sharing borders with Afghanistan and the unstable conditions out there. So one of the things that we come across in the prison is seeing the people who are charged with terrorism, and in the cases of terrorism, and working with them on de-radicalization programs, and learning about them, how radicalized they are, and what the thought process is. So the people who are willing to do those suicide bomb blasts, right? So what's the psychology? So that was very intriguing to me, because I was raised in this culture, and we have witnessed a lot of things here, a lot of traumatic events here. Our children have died in schools because of terrorism and everything. So that's what made me intriguing, thinking about I should study this and learn more about this. So I was actually, I always thought about it this way, that if there are some people out there, some bad people who could manipulate the mindset of people, and what do you call it, brainwash them to engage in these terrorist activities, then we, being psychologists, that should be our job. We should be brainwashing people to do the right things, right? So that's what my mindset was. I thought that if they can radicalize them, there's always a way to de-radicalize, and we can always have hope to make those people correct within our correction system. So that's what the rehabilitation programs are about. We now have also developed a national book where a lot of religious scholars have, approved it, and they say that terrorism is not in accordance with what the Islamic values. It's against the Islamic values, so they do not approve of it, of any of this. So all of these things are part of the literature that we use in the rehabilitation programs to de-radicalize the people who are charged with terrorism. So it's been a very great experience learning more about them, how come they were how they were convinced by those people to join their groups. And it was always fascinating for me to learn about how could we convince someone to wear a suicide, bomb blast, do a suicide bomb blast, right? It was very intriguing to me, like how could someone be convinced to do that? So what I learned is that there's a lot of misinformation. They've been told a lot of verses from Quran out of context. This is what I learned, and a lot of religious information was misinterpreted by them and their leaders, and a lot of this population was very vulnerable in itself. So that's what made them a easy target for those people. And they, when they approached them, they were very eager to join them and join their terrorist organization. So this was very intriguing, and we've been doing some work in de-radicalization and rehabilitation of inmates, and it's been a great experience. We have seen good improvements in people and their thought process over time. But it's a very challenging task. I mean, having someone, if someone believes in it, that they are going to do this, it's very hard to judge whether they've been rehabilitated successfully or not, and we can only guess to a certain extent. But that's what we do. It's part of the rehabilitation programs that we run here.
I have a question, and again, this is more of an inquiry, but I'm wondering about, in those individuals who have been radicalized, the ones that, have sort of adopted this belief system, right? To what extent do you think psychopathy intersects that in some of these cases? And, perhaps like, what is your estimate of like the number of those people? And again, this would be an estimate unless we've looked at it empirically, but how many of those folks would meet criteria for psychopathy if we were to evaluate them?
Yeah, if I were to give a guess figure, I think it's more than the usual correctional population. Like it's more than the 50% of them, because I see a lot of them are convinced, and a lot of them have this grandiose the feeling of self-worth, because they think that they're doing the right thing, and they're emotionally numb. They have shallow affect, as the criteria says. They do have a lot of things that match the criteria, and I think it's very easy to say that like most of them, and the majority population of them, have psychopathic features, and more than half of them meet the criteria, in a rough estimate. And I think that is part of the reason that why they join these groups, because they have this tendency to manipulate, and they've also I also learned that they're also being manipulated by their leaders, because they're misinformed, and they're obviously misinformed about, and that's why they end up creating this belief system, which is all based on not facts, and the facts which are false, right, from the history. So and they're also like radicalized, and hate is instilled in them. They're forced to do things, and I was actually like, when this all hit me, it was an incident that happened about a decade ago, where these terrorists attacked a school here in Pakistan. It was in Peshawar, and they killed about over 100 children, school-going children. So this was something I thought, that how could someone do this? Leave the religion out of it. Like how could a human being kill these children? Like what would force them? And what I learned was there was a lot of hate that was instilled among them. I did a rehabilitation camp for those children, the survivors of those kids of that school, back in the day when I was just a bachelor student. So I was very intrigued, like what could make someone, how could you convince someone to do this? It's like very difficult, like almost unbelievable to me. Like someone would kill these children who have nothing to do with anything, right? But just based on who their parents are, what they did in the past, and everything. So they targeted those children. So that also, I learned that there's a lot of hate involved. They instill a lot of hate, and they use that to force these people to do these violent acts of terrorism.
Yeah, and that speaks to a lack of conscious formation, right? I mean, even if someone becomes radicalized and it has a belief system where they hate the other group, the other culture, the other religion, um, I you would have to have you would have to have a lack of conscience, right, to be able to do something like this. Like it just I don't know that someone who has conscience formation, which we know, with psychopathy, we have this moral disconnection, so to speak, in these are the moral reasoning circuits in the brain. So we know that psychopaths are their brain structures are different. Um, Something like that, you would have to almost assume that the individual that could do something like that would meet criteria for psychopathy, right? Like
Yeah,
there's
yeah, obviously, and also I think like in the studies of like studying the psychology of terrorism, I've learned that they use a lot of techniques that actually help them, get convinced that they identify like those children. They would not call them children. They would say that they're subjects, and the damage was collateral. Like so, they use these terminologies just to get over the guilt of killing those children, right? So they use all of these techniques. The terrorist organizations, they do that, and that's what makes them. And obviously, they do meet the criteria for psychopathy too.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. This minimization and dehumanization of people. And I'll speak to this. When I've interviewed a lot of psychopaths in a previous career. When I was a police officer, and one of the things I would notice is individuals who clearly had psychopathic traits or would probably meet criteria when they talk about the victims. You know, they tend to use this distancing language, and they tend to refer to them more as not human, the individual, something like that, not an actual person. They would psychologically distance themselves, and that's again another thing that I think happens and what we see in these folks when we're actually talking to them about what they've done, and they speak about it. The language is very different than a non-psychopath.
Right, and a lot of phenomena of psychology are happening there. The sharing of responsibility. The person who actually blasts the bomb doesn't have the controls of it, and there's someone else like who has the authority and who's at the back end, who's controlling all of this. And they say, "Yo," and the person who does the damage, he thinks that, okay, I'm not responsible. I'm just following the orders, right? So that those kind of psychological tricks they all do, and that helps. Otherwise, I mean, it's almost inhuman to think about it. Like, how could someone kill children? How could someone kill innocent people, right? So that's what makes them, I think, do these acts.
Where here in California, I have not had contact with the terrorist, although Dr. Wetterer and I in California maybe are more inclined to come across school shooters. And what is your experience, Dr. Wetterer, with school shooters and, what we're talking about as far as psychopathy and individuals distancing themselves from seeing other humans as humans, but subjects, or this hate, as you speak about, Dr. Ali, and just making this transactional? They come in and they're under this belief they must eliminate this problem, and this is how they're going to do it.
Yeah, I think with school shooters, there's a variation in the psychology, but I think there are some corollaries to like what we see with a terrorist. And so generally with school shooters, what we do see is we see disenfranchised younger adults and sometimes even adolescents who have disconnected from their social group. They've been rejected from their social group, but that's not all it takes, right? I mean, there's a lot of kids that are alienated. There's a lot of kids who are bullied, but when we see those behaviors, when we see those things happening with individuals who turn out to come back and commit these crimes, those are generally the patterns, at least that I've seen. But there's also a process, I think, where a lot of these individuals would meet criteria for psychopathy, because again, we have to understand that, like, we know that psychopathy is a brain disorder. It's a brain, if you want to call it a disease, we could call it a disease, but it is a brain disorder. We've got, enough neuroscience evidence to support that. So, like these kids that end up in these young adults that end up, doing these school shootings, which we have a lot of these happening. I mean, we have them happening all over the country in the United States. And it's kind of a United States thing too, which is interesting because you don't see this happening in other countries where guns are part of the culture, or they have access to firearms, or at least you don't see it to the same degree. But these folks, these kids, if we were to assess them, I think most of them would meet that criteria for psychopathy. That conscious formation's not there. Once they've been alienated enough to where, when you hear some of them talk about, kind of the why do they do this? You hear these narratives, right, about how they were rejected. They were rejected if they're mostly male shooters, right? They're rejected by women. They feel like, at this point, they have this vengeance mentality. They want to get back at society. They want to get back at people. All of that, I think, intersects with that predisposition for having, these psychopathic traits. So, you get a mix of those two things together, right? You get those two together and you've got a problem, so that's kind of how I think it evolves in a lot of cases. But I'm wondering if, Dr. Ali maybe has some perspective on this, because it's a little, in Pakistan, it's certainly a lot different. Yes, you don't necessarily have school shootings, but you have these terrorist attacks that happen, right? That are levied against schools and children.
So one of the incidents that I recall, it was a recent incident. It happened a few years ago, about a year ago or so, in Buffalo, New York, right? That there was this white supremacist who attacked that supermarket where there were a lot of black people were killed, right? So I see this, like, a lot of these individuals that they are like lone wolf terrorists, and they are mostly self-radicalized through some material on the internet. Obviously, there are issues in the childhood. Obviously, they do have these psychopathic traits and everything. So all of these, like, combine together, and the result is a violent incident.
Yeah, I agree. It's that I call it the intersection of, you've got the predisposition, the vulnerabilities there, the brain structures that are, not regulated appropriately. And I mean, I want to get into a deep discussion about the neuroscience of psychopathy, but we know that there's differences, right, in those circuits, particularly in the limbic system, but also in these moral reasoning circuits. So if somebody has those vulnerabilities already, and then they have these exposures, for example, they become self-radicalized, you've got a dangerous person on your hands.
We had a case study here in Pakistan where this young girl who's a medical student, a first year or second year medical student, she actually went, she was about to go to a church to do a suicide bomb blast, but she was arrested before that. So it was very interesting for everyone, because before that we had this national perspective that suicide bombers are usually like illiterate people. They lack education. They don't come from a good family background and everything. So this case study changed the narrative entirely, because she belonged to a well-off family, studying medicine. Second year, she was about to become a medical doctor. Her father is a professor at a university. And her mother had passed away, so she was the only daughter, and she also had a couple of brothers. So what happened, what we learned is there is a lot of neglect in the childhood. She had this disconnect with the family. And then one fine day, she learns from Facebook and other social media that there was this jihad movement going on somewhere in Syria, and this caliphate movement, that there should be caliphate should be all over the Muslim world and everything. So she was intrigued by these concepts, and someone like offered that, okay, you could be part of this movement and you could play your part in spreading the word of caliphate and Islam and everything. So she was radicalized through social media, and she agreed to go to Syria to get a training. And she also agreed to do the suicide bombing at a church here in Lahore, Pakistan. So all of these things, I think, again, we saw case study where there was this neglect in the childhood, disconnect with the family, and vulnerability was there, and someone took advantage of that through the social media and, radicalized her. And we almost had a suicide bombing incident here in Pakistan due to that. But fortunately, that lady was later on rehabilitated, and now she's back in the society pursuing her degree again. So it took a lot of rehabilitation and everything, because that was a very interesting case study. So I think, again, it's a mix of everything. They don't necessarily belong to a specific background. It could be any well-off family. It could be education. There could be education there, but radicalization is a mindset that if the vulnerability is there and someone, they find the right content that hits them, uh, and over the period of time, I've also noticed that these terrorist organizations, their content, this the content they preach, they're also improving that. So they have now brochures and everything that they use to radicalize people. They spread those brochures. They do this marketing. They use those campaigns on social media and everything. So all of this is happening in the background. So that's why I believe that we also need to improve at the same rate, and improve our rehabilitation programs, focus on prevention of these such incidents by doing more of the media campaigns, and doing talk shows like these, where that could help people, get awareness about these incidents, and how to keep your children protected, how to keep yourself protected from such things. So I think it's very, very important. I really appreciate all the work that you guys are doing to do the awareness.
So I'm interested to know more about the rehabilitation aspect that you offer inside the prison. I hadn't really ever considered terrorists treatable for rehabilitation in prison. I didn't know there was a specific program for that, and that's very interesting. I can tell you that rehabilitation in corrections in the United States and in California, I think for the most part, largely we could say is really not happening. Rehabilitation with there's really not programs in our prisons in California that are rehabilitating people. And that is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, so I will certainly comment on this. California has programs, right? They do have programs that they implement in the prison system that are aimed at rehabilitation, but the question of whether they're actually effective is another question. And I think the answer to that, which is what you just spoke to, is we're not doing a very good job of it. And the reason we know that is that we can look at outcome data when individuals who do parole, right, they get out of prison, the recidivism rates are still very, very high, meaning that if your goal was to rehabilitate this individual so that you can get them resocialized into society so they become productive and they're not antisocial, they're not doing these antisocial behaviors that get them there in the first place, then that would be great. But that's not what we see in the data in here in the United States. And I was going to ask you, Dr. Ali, about, and it was very interesting to hear about this case study with this this student that was studying medicine, that she was able to you were able to sort of unradicalize her, and she's now back. I'm assuming now maybe she's practicing medicine now and she's successful. So that would tell me, at least my understanding, again, this is of the literature and of what we know about if she was, let's assume she was a psychopath. I mean, we don't know that, but I would suggest she wasn't, because it's rehabilitating psychopathy. In other words, treating somebody and sort of reducing the severity of those traits or eliminating them. We don't have, at least we don't have evidence that any of the current programs actually work. But is there anything going on in Pakistan that could be different that you've seen that's shown
For
promise?
the specific case, I also believe that she doesn't have like a lot of psychopathic traits or features, and the programs that we run, we also have the same challenge. Recidivism rate is also very high here. We also believe that we are also not doing a great job of rehabilitation, and there's a lot of room for improvement. But at the same time, I think we are doing an effort. We are making an effort, and there are a lot of activities that happen within the prison system. And I work at a pretty large prison system. We have over 8,000 inmates, so it's a pretty huge prison system, right? And we like do groups with them, and we do a lot of arts activities. They do drawings and everything, and music. They watch movies. So a lot happening, like individual sessions, group sessions. We do have like some specific team focus group for people, and then individual sessions, and then sports activities. They are engaged in different activities. Obviously, not everyone can be engaged because there's like only so much space that only a bunch of people can participate at a single time. But yeah, they're engaged in different activities, education programs. For instance, like for terrorism, I was discussing with Dr. Anderson earlier that we have developed a national book against terrorism. So that basically has, so we have like a lot of our national religious scholars. They have agreed to that religion, that extremism and violence and terrorism is against Islam, so against the teachings of Islam. So they have like separated Islam from it. So that actually helps. And now when we educate these individuals who are like charged with terrorism, now and they're learning that terrorism is against the values of Islam. However, they were told otherwise when they were recruited in the terrorist organizations. So that's news to them, and that's something that they appreciate very much. And that actually is the hope for us, that they would be rehabilitated, because if we are able to correct the facts for them, that this is what you were told, which is wrong, and this is the actual representation of Islam. However, again, it's not limited to Islam. It's not limited to any kind of ethnicity. It's like we have all sorts of people, all kinds of religion, and people engaging in terrorism. So it's coming from somewhere, but it's like this was one of the causes that's internationally recognized, that because of people are manipulating and misinforming other people and then recruiting them into this terrorist organization. So we figured out a way to stop that, and now we have a national curriculum that is against this, and that that quotes verses from Quran and Hadith, and that says that terrorism is against Islam totally. And we have like most of our religious scholars have signed with that they agree to this. So it's nationally accepted. So that has helped a lot, and that has actually prevented a lot of new terrorism cases here in Pakistan, at least.
Wow. This is amazing. I would be fascinated to come do a tour at your facility and take a look at it firsthand and learn more. I think this is incredible.
You're more than welcome to come here.
Yeah, who wants to sponsor me? Who wants to sponsor my research? Dr. Wetterer and I want to fly us there. I just find it incredibly interesting.
Be a business expense.
Yeah. We'll do a cross-cultural comparison on
There you go.
psychopathy. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I really am fascinated cross-culturally, and that's why I'm so glad you were able to join us, because I don't know what's happening in other parts in the world, right? I need to sit down and talk with forensic psychologists all over the world. And I was telling Dr. Ali earlier, I met with someone from Poland this month, the UK, and someone from Scotland. And there was another forensic psychologist from Pakistan who wanted to join the discussion today. We'll save it for another time. But I want to be educated on what's happening around the world and collaborate together and like come up with solutions. I went to the UK and looked at their criminal justice system back in 2013, and it really opened up my mindset to think in a different way of comparing it to the California system and just look at other systems that are in place, whether they're effective or not. What are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? What can we do differently? Because I really want to prevent crimes from occurring. And as you stated earlier, never underestimate the power of an effective intervention, which is what we can do. We can be placed in situations to intervene from potentially murder terrorist acts. Like, how powerful is that? And so I'm sure in your career, how rewarding that is to see all of this happen, but then to be in a position to intervene now and potentially rehabilitate. Like, what is that experience like for you?
It's truly amazing. I had never thought about it this way, and I actually tell this story to people who like I tell about my experience, my journey with prisons. So when I joined prisons in 2019, about 5.5 years ago. I was posted at a far off city of Pakistan. It was a very suburb area, and there were not a lot of educated people. I was thinking that, okay, how do I practice psychotherapy here when there's like not even educated population? Where would I find the right population to practice it? So I started doing some awareness sessions within that prison system that also had a population of 4,000 plus inmates. So I started doing some awareness sessions, at the jail factory, at different locations within the prison. I did awareness seminars on depression, anxiety, what it looks like being a mental illness, and everything. So I did that, my homework, and then one day I was sitting in my office. It was a very small office in the prison hospital inside the jail. So I was sitting in my office. It was past 4 p.m. and most of the staff the duty was changing. So I didn't have a lot of staff. So now this huge guy, so this area is known for people who are very violent. They're giant. They're like, their physiques are giant and they're very violent. They're known. It's a very dangerous prison of Pakistan. So anyways, I was sitting in my office. There was this giant guy walking towards my office. I saw him and I was like, oh my God, what would I do? I have no security. No one is here. There's no prison staff and everything. And I was worried that what would I do and how would I run from here? I was just making escape plans in my mind. And this guy comes to the door and says, "May I come in?" I say, "Okay, please come have a sit." No, I was all literally sweating at that moment, and I was thinking, what would happen? Now, 10 seconds later, this same guy, like, he bursts into tears and starts crying, doesn't say a word, and he just starts crying. And now I am like, oh my God, I was worried that he's gonna come and hit me. And now I have a client and he is like so emotional. And then he talks about it. He says that I have kept it inside me for years. I couldn't talk about it at all. This is a kind of illness I didn't even know. So now I'm talking to you. I have felt it this way all on the outer side. I'm a wrestler, but on the inside, I feel very weak, and I feel emotionally very down. So I need help. That changed everything for me. That day I thought that this is the place where help is very hard to reach. He would have never found a psychologist in this entire city. Now I'm here, sitting here. I have this responsibility to help this gentleman and help more people like him. So that's the impact I could create. And that actually helps me keep going every day, because the prison I work at, the circumstances are not great. It's very harsh weather conditions. These are like open lands, and we have to walk a lot of distance every day within the prison, because there's like not a lot of transport, and it's a huge place, 8,000 inmates. So I have to walk to different blocks of the prison to see different categories of inmates, and to run different rehab activities. So all of this is happening, but it keeps me motivated because I know the impact that is happening is huge. And there's still a lot more to come, because once we have this research tools, once we have more evidence-based programs we're running into the prisons, I think it would make a lot of difference for a lot of peoples here in Pakistan and also internationally, because I think we share problems with a lot of low and middle income countries, Sri Lanka, India, so Bangladesh. So all of those countries and the prison system there have very similar issues that we have. The limited resources and a lot of overcrowding. So all of these things are happening everywhere. So if we come up with solutions, that's going to have a pretty huge impact. So that's what I'm looking at, helping a lot of helping the prisons within my country, and helping people outside of this too, by developing those, standardizing those rehabilitation programs and activities within the prison. So that's the goal is.
Yeah, and you make an important point here about you know rehabilitation, in the sense that there are people that are in prison that actually are amenable to rehabilitation, that actually do need help, seek help, they actually want to change, right? Or they want to address their problems. And so I think the challenge is, and you probably may agree with this, is trying to figure out who are those people? Like, how do we differ? Because we know, at least from, we know from the literature that, if we've got a hardcore psychopath that is just, an entrenched psychopath with a very high, PCL score, we're probably not going to move that needle very much in terms of rehabilitation. That's just my perspective right now. But trying to figure out, like, who are those people that we can actually reach, that are, say in an 8,000 inmate, prison where you think that 50% or more possibly would meet criteria. It's like, it's that other 50% that I think are where we want to deploy resources, at least at this point, because we don't have, and this is a thing that, researchers need to, maybe step up to the plate and try to figure this out, to try to figure out, could we develop an intervention strategy or a, modality that would target, psychopathy, would actually change, the behavioral side of their, of their behavior. We're not necessarily changing brain structure. At least we don't know that we could do that, but the behavioral outcomes, like how could we modify the behavior so that they could literally become more adaptive and socialized and not engage in, all these manipulative, behaviors where they're harming people, right, and harming society. That's the hard part, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Because I mean, this population, they are like very manipulative, very hard to identify. One of the things that we do is initial screening and categorization of inmates right when they enter the prison. So we see those inmates every day, every morning when we enter the prison. So all the inmates that came last night and then that morning, we would just quickly go through them and do a quick screening of them, whether like what category they are. And then that helps actually decide their placement, like where would they be confined within the prison and what kind of rehabilitation program they would be engaged in. And obviously we do further assessments and detailed assessments of the individuals that we take out from that, because we have like 100 people coming in new every day. So we could do a quick screening and then do a detailed assessments of a few of those that we identify, and then we go from there. Psychopathic individuals we come across every day, and we are able to identify, because of when I have a story again on top of my head. So there was this guy, he manipulated the former prime minister of the country, and he told him that I'm someone else, and he introduced himself as a senior judge of the Supreme Court of Pakistan, and whereas he was not, obviously. And then he manipulated a lot of other people too. Now he comes to me and he tells me that he is a bureaucrat, and he studied PhD from that country and everything, and he's bragging about all those different things. So now one of the things that we do is we review collateral information. So I brought up his legal record. So what has been charged with? I noticed that he claims to be someone else. He's charged with impostering someone else, a chief justice, a senior justice of the court. So all of those things. So I'm able to identify that this guy is psychopath. Now I need to treat him accordingly. He's manipulating me. He has some gains. Why is he coming to me? Right? So what does he want? So that's a very important question that we try to answer within the prison. That what does this guy want? What's the gain? If he's a psychopath, and I mean, within the prison system, there were a lot of inmates who would go to him because he told them that he's a former justice. So they would go for legal advice to him, and this guy has no background, nothing, and he's giving legal advice, free legal advice to people. But he's even charging them for that, for the advice. And he even told someone that he's going to call them and get their case wrapped up, because he's obviously the former justice of that court and everything. So I mean, there are these people who manipulate a lot. The prognosis is not great, as we all agree. But we do a little attempt, engaging them in different activities that we could at least make them manageable within the society, because they are going to go out. The criminal justice system is not great. They cannot, distinguish these people from others, and they cannot keep them within the prison forever. So they will ultimately be released, and they have a life outside. So we try to minimize the damage that they could do to the society and help them manage their behaviors better. So I think that's what we try to do.
Yeah, that, and I'm glad to hear that. I heard about the intake when they come into the prison, and so this is an interesting point because here's what happens in California. Yes, they go through classification, right? They go to a prison first, which is a classification prison, to figure out what level prison they need to go to, what type of yard would they be appropriate on. Again, depending on a lot of factors, right? They have it's sort of a checklist and all of that. But one of the things that doesn't, at least in California, that doesn't happen is when they come in, if they are classified as, needing mental health services, maybe, because they meet criteria and there's specific criteria, they will be placed in a mental health program. But one of the things that doesn't happen is they're not comprehensively assessed when they come in. In other words, they rely on self-report, or they rely on some collateral data from outside. And we know the reliability of this data a lot of times is not that great. So here's what happens in California. We get people coming in, and speaking to the manipulation, a lot of them know that if they can get into a mental health program, they're going to get access to services, and they're going to be able to sort of manipulate better. So again, we don't know, we don't have a good grasp on who is actually genuinely mentally ill and who isn't. And who are the psychopaths that are in there manipulating their way in. And the problem with it is that when you've got psychopaths mixed in with genuinely mentally ill people, we know what happens, right? Those genuinely mentally ill people end up getting victimized, manipulated, just like what you're speaking about. And so that's a big problem that needs to be addressed in at least in correctional psychology that I see, that we don't, at least here, from when I worked in the prisons from 2015 to 2018. So it wasn't that long ago. And I worked in all levels of mental health, and I ran an inpatient psychiatric crisis bed unit. So I got to see all of the, the processes and all of the manipulation that was going on in there with inmates who are not mentally ill necessarily, but they engage in these behaviors to mimic mental illness because it's a process of manipulation to get to the state hospital, which is where you have more in California. If you can get to the state hospital, you have more freedoms, because in a state hospital, there's less restrictions generally, right? So that's the hard part. And it sounds like you struggle with that as well, at least in your system,
Yes.
right? That's what I'm hearing.
So what we have done here, we have dedicated a few rooms within the mental health unit. So we have rooms. So we have dedicated a few rooms to people who are kept under observation. So like if someone reports on the first day that they have mental illness and everything, and we also figure out that something is fishy there, we would simply put them under observation for a couple of days within our supervised cell. And over there, we'll get the behavioral report of that person, and detailed observation of what they do all day and what are the activities. And so we get to know like better what's the mental health level. And again, we do the detailed assessment of those individuals. And if they're clear, then they're discharged right away. So that's what we do. That's how we play with it. And they're not mixed with other mentally ill prisoners, so they could not do any damage to them, any harm to them. So that's how we do the damage control.
Well, it sounds so from what it sounds like you're doing a better job than what I saw. Like, because again, and you probably don't know this, but in California, the prison system, most of it is still in a receivership. It's in federal oversight. And back in the 1990s, there was a large lawsuit filed against the state of California because the allegations were that the inmates were not receiving adequate medical and mental health care. And it was true that there were deficiencies in the system back then. So there's been this oversight since the 1990s, and a lot of the prisons are actually still in this oversight. It's called the Coleman, the Coleman monitoring, basically, is the way we call it. And so what's happened, at least from what I've seen in the system in California, is that we have Coleman monitors that come into and they audit all the programs that we're doing. And there's lots of mandates put in place. In other words, it's, if somebody has mental health symptoms, or if they're reporting mental health symptoms, then, it's like they're mandated to get into those programs. But we don't have those breaks in place to say, wait a minute, hold on, because we're not comprehensively assessing them and going, no, this is antisocial personality disorder that we're dealing with here. This is behavioral. This is not mental illness. we don't do a good job of that, at least, when I was in the system. And I'm happy to hear that at least, in other countries, at least in Pakistan, there's that recognition that we have to figure these people. We can't just make assumptions and go, okay, yeah, we're giving all these services away. Because again, what happens is you get these psychopaths in the mix of mentally ill folks, and then those mentally ill folks are being victimized and manipulated by these psychopaths that are in these mental health treatment programs. And that's a big problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree. It's a huge problem. And we also need to find better ways to handle this. I think developing some programs and assessments that we could filter out right away, and that could tell something. But I think it would take a while, but we'd get there.
Yeah, part of the problem, again, in California, the prison system is the second largest in the United States. I think Texas has the most prisons and inmates, but California is number 2. So we have a lot of prisons and we have a lot of inmates. We have a lot of people incarcerated, although those numbers have gone down in the last 5 to 10 years. But we don't have resources to be able to comprehensively evaluate all of these folks. Like when you think about it in terms of the number, like you said, you have 100 new prisoners coming into your prison every day. We all know how long it takes to do a comprehensive psychological evaluation. If I'm going to do an MMPI on someone, that takes time. We've got to interpret it. You're interviewing them. You're looking at records. This is work. And so that's another issue. It's a resource problem too, I think, in a lot of these systems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It takes a lot of time. And when we're doing parole assessments, so we do have this parole risk assessment. So all inmates, before they're released on parole, they are assessed by psychologists and that report. So their decision of getting released on parole depends upon that report a lot. And obviously a lot of other factors too. So when we do that, we dedicate an entire day for one person, reviewing the record, doing all the testing, interpreting those tests, and making a report, seeing that individual, interviewing that individual, and collecting collateral from his peers in the prison, and his family members. Sometimes we can talk to the family, like how does he behave, what does he want, what does he do outside the prison, and all of those details, and also reviewing the case detail of what were they charged with initially, and how do they report about it, how do they talk about the incident that happened that helped that actually was responsible for ending them, helping them end up in the prison, right? So we review those records, all the court details, the court judgment and everything. So it takes a lot of time. One individual per day is the most we could do.
Wow, that's comprehensive. Like that, I don't see that happening in our system, at least, to that level. I'm not seeing that. I don't know if Dr. Anderson has a comment on that, or if you've heard of that level. So when prisoners are released in California on parole, there's a parole board, right? And that's an independent party that will review they do review the records, but it's not always the case that a psychologist gets involved in terms of making a recommendation. If there's an issue of risk of violence, particularly sexual violence, then that can often trigger a separate evaluation that's done by an independent psychologist outside to determine whether or not this person is safe to be released into the community. Because in California, we have what are called sexually violent predator statute. I don't know if you have this in Pakistan, but so if you're convicted of a sex crime, a serious felony like rape or child molestation or something very serious, and you've served your time, and now you're eligible for parole, right? If you're eligible to be released, this inmate will have to go through a comprehensive evaluation, and in some cases, if the evaluator determines that they are a high risk of committing sexual violence, if they're released, they can be civilly committed. So I don't know if that's something that can happen. Do you have forensic like a state of for like a forensic hospital that's in Pakistan, or is it just the prison system?
Yeah, we don't have specific forensic or high secure or medium secure hospitals. We don't have that concept yet, but we do have some cells dedicated within the main mental health hospital. So we have a huge mental health institution here that's called Punjab Institute of Mental Health. And within that institute, we do have some cells dedicated for forensic patients. So likewise, we're at every district level, we do have a hospital, and then some specific beds dedicated to forensic patients. So that's how we usually deal with that. And those who require like long-term care within a forensic hospital, they're usually shifted to that main central hospital that has more resources and beds. So that's how we do it. But usually, like it's hard to manage those inmates, and prisons are no place. I keep telling the judges too here that prison is no place not to manage an inmate who has mental illness, someone who is schizophrenic and psychotic. I mean, you cannot just keep them here for long-term treatment. It's not a place for that. We do rehabilitation, we manage them, but it's just a temporary phase. And for the long-term care, they need to be at a mental health hospital. That's what we recommend.
Dr. Ali, as we wrap it up, I want you to share one last story. I know you make some observations on behavior, right? And we're talking about psychopathy. Can you tell me about the individual that you were seeing who cut off his girlfriend's head and was attempting to manipulate you? Tell me about your observations.
Yeah, so we came across this case where this guy, I mean, he brutally murdered his girlfriend. I mean, he literally beheaded her, and he was like playing with the body when the eyewitnesses came on the scene, and they were when they tried to enter the room, he actually even attacked them. He tried to shot them, but then the bullet wasn't fired, so he stabbed them with a knife, and those witnesses were also injured in the process, but he was fortunately caught by the system, by the police system, and he was arrested and charged, and he came to the prison. So now once he enters the prison, he's fine. Like he's someone like who has some background in psychology and psychotherapy. He studied psychotherapy somewhere. So now he for first day he talks to me about Freud and everything. He has discussions with me on that, and he doesn't know like precisely who am I. He's not aware of who am I. He just thinks I'm just part of the system, or some doctor who's visiting from the outside doesn't know that I'm the prison psychologist there. So he talks to me about that in detail, and I'm just listening, taking my notes and everything. And a few days later, he learns that who am I, and now he stops. He doesn't talk to anyone. He stops eating. He's like, he has this speech. If you listen, I mean, if you don't know the background, if you have not seen him before that manipulative phase, you would be convinced that he's psychotic, because his speech is like so repetitive. His writing, I mean, if he writes, it doesn't look normal. It looks like a psychotic person has written it. All of those things, so what we were challenged, like the court is asking for a report that whether this person is fit mentally or not, and we have to come with a conclusion, and we are all like double-minded what to do. So what we did was we installed this camera in his cell, and we took observations for the entire day, what his activities were, what would he do, how would he behave. So I used to like watch the recordings of those camera, and I would see that he's making coffee in the morning, and having breakfast, smoking cigarettes, and doing all those things within his cell, and talking to people, the policeman, the prison staff, and everyone. And once like someone who he thinks that is gonna judge him walks in, and he all of a sudden shuts down, doesn't talk, and it also came to a point where he stopped eating everything, and we had to like do this NG tube, and he was fed through that. And we also got an observation on that at night he would go to the washroom and have his food, and I would eat there outside the washroom. All of those things that we figured that okay, this is manipulation, and we made sure that he gets the report. The court was informed that he's mentally stable, and he's fit to stand trial and face the charges for the crime that he's committed, and he's been charged now. He got the death sentence, capital punishment here, ultimately. So that's a very interesting case study that we came across, and we learned that we observed him over the period that how manipulative he was. He had different, although he was very educated, he had a lot of information. He would read. So one day, another story. One fine day, I went to his room, and I noticed that he's reading books. Now this guy who appears psychotic to the many others around him, now he's reading books. He's got like a collection of books. So I was very fascinated and I was shocked when I saw this. He was reading a book on the insanity plea. I was shocked, like, how could this book end up here? But I realized that the people who distribute books, they even didn't know, like, what does it mean? And this guy was reading the insanity plea, learning all the ways of how to manipulate and how to make the most benefit of the criminal justice system and how to get out of it, all of those things. And so, yeah, it's one heck of an experience that we had. And I should write a book on him like someday.
I was so glad to hear that there's cross-cultural relevance here. We see this all the time, right? And this, what you describe is if the listeners, if they want to watch a movie that's emblematic of what you're describing about this type of manipulation, it's a movie from the 1990s, Primal Fear, with Edward Norton. Describes what you're talking about, in detail, and just that we call this incongruent, right, presentation of psychotic symptoms, and boy, yep, that's universal. It seems like it's universal. We see it all the time too.
Primal Fear had me on the hook. I was shook, and that was a pivotal point for me to say, whoa, I wouldn't ever want to be bamboozled like that. And so, as forensic psychologists, we assess what you just described, and we're good at it. Or you should be if you're in this position, because you're faced with it often. And it's the difference between getting away with murder or getting convicted. And I'm telling you what, we do a lot of malingering assessments, and we'd love to have you back on another episode talking about some insanity cases you've seen where people attempt to feign psychiatric symptoms in an effort to appear like they have a mental illness so they can not be charged with their crimes. These cases are so important for the safety of society. And so I really appreciate your discussion today. It's very informative. I learned so much. We'd love to have you back on and share your insight from Pakistan. And for the rest of everyone listening out there, feel free to engage with us on social media. LinkedIn is a professional platform where I met Dr. Ali. We just met. And I think it's a wonderful connection. And so for other professionals that want to provide input, please connect, be a guest, and we will have videos on YouTube as well, where you can interact with longer content and ask us questions, or let us know what cases you want to hear, or we can all answer questions through social media as well. And hopefully that can connect us to other opportunities to share this information, through the form of webinars, educational content, CEUs. But I really appreciate your insight today. It was very informative, so thank you. Thanks for listening, Killer Psychologist. For episode details and merch, check out killerpsychologistpodcast.com. And for forensic services, you can book online at psychologydr.com. That's psychologydoctor.com.